Hey, what's up everyone? Today we're going to talk about death and dying. Not in a morbid way, but actually to help many of us who are curious about it to find some peace of mind, separating fact from fiction. I'm Risa Morimoto, your host, and you're watching Modern Aging, where we chat about innovative and holistic ways to care for one another as we age. If you want to stay in the loop about all our latest videos, click on that subscribe button and that little bell so you're sure to always be notified when new episodes are uploaded. Today's guest is Dr. Kerr. He's Chief Medical Officer and CEO of Hospice Buffalo. He's interviewed thousands of patients over the years about their experiences as they approach the end of their lives. You can check out his TED Talk on YouTube. Just type in Christopher Kerr, I See Dead People. We had an awesome conversation about the process of dying, separating what is common myth to what is actual fact. Check it out. You know, when we first talked, or when I first saw your TED Talk, I was very excited to talk to you. Today we're going to talk about the process of dying. But before we kind of get to that, I'd love to hear a little bit about you and your background, how you came to become a hospice doctor.
Sure. Okay. I'm born and raised in Toronto, Canada. I'm
nice
still Canadian. Came down for a beer in the early 80s and ended up staying.
Seriously?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I met somebody, and so I've been here ever since, and I live close to the Canadian border in a small town called East Aurora near Buffalo. And I live on a horse farm.
Wow.
I got to hospice completely by accident. I did my residency at Strong in internal medicine, and then I came to Buffalo for cardiology, and I needed to moonlight to support my family. And one day I'm looking through the want ads and saw an ad for a hospice doctor. And funny because I had petitioned to actually get out of the rotation as a resident. I didn't think there was anything to learn or do.
Wow.
So I went there just looking to do some weekend work to supplement my income. And that's how it happened. And I started working there, and I just was immediately taken by how much there was to do.
Right, I know. Well, I'm curious actually, how much, like, what do you do as a hospice doctor?
You know, you're really looking after the totality of the patient. So from complex symptom issues to psychological distress, you're caring for their practical needs, you're caring for them in the context of their family. The best way to describe it is other specialties of medicine tend to be organ focused.
Right.
And we're focused on the larger experience of illness, anything that's affecting quality of life. So it's heavily predicated on a lot of communication, open, honest, transparent communication. So that includes prognostication, what to expect, things that may be absent upstream in the care of the patient. So it's all of that.
Wow, so you must develop kind of close relations with some of these patients, no? I mean, and what's kind of the normal span of time that they're there?
Well, unfortunately, there's a subset of patients, probably a third, that are in for a week or less. And then the rest may be there for several months. But you do get very close because you get to see them as people, not just patients. You're caring for them in their home, you're caring for them in the context of their relationships, their existential issues.
So you do house calls?
Oh yeah.
Oh, wow.
I'm sorry, yeah, most of hospice is home-based care.
Oh, okay, so I thought you were in an institution. I thought you were in an actual, like, hospice.
No, we have a dedicated unit, a freestanding unit where people come who are in distress or can't be cared for in their home. Mm-hmm. But the vast majority of patients, 95% of our patients we care for where they are.
Right.
Yeah.
And I feel like...
Most people don't want to die in a hospital.
Right. Well, for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
That's amazing though. So are you also there at the last moments?
Often, yep. Mm-hmm.
And so what actually happens when do you know that death is imminent? At what point?
It's really notable for how atraumatic it is,
mm-hmm.
Or anticlimactic it is. Dying is really a process. It doesn't occur in minutes. It usually occurs in months. 10% of deaths are acute. The rest are essentially forecastable. And the common denominator for all of them is a lessening. You eat less, you do less, you sleep more, and that's the trajectory. We tend to think of it, illness in terms of parts, but this is more constitutional dying. And if you think of old people who've died. 1 month they stop going to get their mail. The next month they stop going upstairs. They start napping more. They eat less. The body has ways of telling itself that we're dwindling. And that's what dying really is. It's a dwindle. It's a slowing down. And you sleep more comfortably. So there's less to do than you would think. We tend to complicate dying.
Yeah.
An early illness is, if you take something like cancer, where you are in the disease is determined by, the size or the spread. And so we get very focused on quantifying illness in terms of measurables. What are blood counts? What's the size of the tumor? That sort of thing. But actually, that becomes less of the issue. So we see people who are dying even as tumors are regressing. Because, because it's not really the issue. It's the burden of disease over time. So if you had the flu for 3 days, you'd feel one way. The flu symptoms could be less, but if you had those symptoms for 30 days, you would feel dramatically different. So it's that weight of illness. It's the cost on the body, and what it gradually it doesn't pay to do. It pays to do less, to eat less. And that's why the common denominator is progressive sleep, unless something's interfering with that process. Something being, pain or a bad cough or breathlessness. So a symptom. Otherwise, it's actually there's a built-in mechanism for dying that it's innate.
Do you think that people know when they're dying?
Yes. That's the joke's on us. I even know doctors who, don't want to tell a patient that they're dying because they equate that with giving up or taking away hope, right? Which is absurd.
Right.
First of all,
Why?
It's the patient's life and their body. In an age of autonomy and self-determination, if anything, you should have the right to reclaim what's happening with your life. But unfortunately, that actually happens. People keep that from patients. I've never met one that didn't know they were dying. Even in dementia, it's shocking how people have an awareness. I mean, if you're lying in bed and you can't get up anymore, you look at your arm and it's half the size it was, you have a way of self-informing that defies medicine's best attempt to deny dying. The tension comes when there's an incongruity, and you see it all the time, where patients are aware, yet medicine's telling them something else.
In terms of the actual physical process, right? So once they're in hospice, do they get pulled off all their meds? Is it
No,
just
not
kind
at
of
all.
pain?
No, there's a lot of myths with hospice. First of all, physical pain is way overstated. It's less.
Oh, it is?
Oh, sure. Oh, yeah. Far and away, I would say confusional states, psychogenic distress, the consequences of impairing sleep or changing sleep architecture. As people start to transition, those become more prominent. Pain is much less of the issue.
Right, that's the fear, right?
Yeah, and that's that's a symptom of what's wrong in the care of sick people, is that people go into it completely uninformed as to what to expect next. I often tell the story that people will go to their cancer hospital, know where to park, how much the coffee is,
Right.
but they actually don't know how they're going to die, let alone when they're going to die.
Is that just because the doctor doesn't tell them, or they don't ask, or is there just like this weird
Yeah, there's a couple of symptoms. Sometimes it's hard for patients to hear it, so there are doctors who are fully disclosing. I think that medicine is set up to be so interventional. Even the economics of medicine don't really recognize the dying patient. They recognize the patients we do things to.
Right.
If you think about it. So you don't go to the hospital because you're feeling sick and are dying. You go there because something is being done to you.
Right.
Even if it's just an imaging. So that's where we recognize the patient. So we're heavily focused, obviously, on the treatment, not the relief of suffering. And so the dying patient almost falls off the assembly line of care in our modern healthcare system. And because the primary doctor has a much different role now, they They often fade into the backdrop as subspecialty medicine takes over.
Right.
But if you don't have a reason to go back to the doctor, you're often left. And you're left with these great questions. Where am I at? What's going to happen to me?
And that's where the fear comes in.
Yeah, and we have a medical culture that's death-defying.
Yeah, why?
It's interesting. I think that as medicine's evolved and there's more to do, we become self-enamored with technology and the skills that we can bring to bear to fight illness. But we've got more and more focused on organs and not the big picture.
Right.
I think there's an assumption that somebody else is telling the patient, what's actually happening. And there's some data that's really interesting. The more doctors involved, the less the patient actually knows.
Oh, interesting.
Well, because you got a bunch of spot welders.
Right.
I'm the kidney guy. I don't know what's going on with this.
The heart.
I'm here for your heart. I don't know what's going. So it's very possible to be getting world-class care, multi-million-dollar care, be within a unit or something, and the family not actually know what's transpiring.
Right.
So there is a gross absence of honest communication about what's happening. And if you think about it, if your means of communicating with your doctor is because you're being evaluated or something's being done to you, when there's no longer anything to do, which is the worst words you can say in medicine, there's nothing more we can do for you, that's when you literally go home and your family and you are left with what happens next. And unfortunately, we're in a healthcare environment where there's very little dollars towards care at home. So when you need care most, you receive the least amount. So yeah, it's tragic.
So in terms of the actual physical process of dying, like the steps, how do you advise families and how do you advise patients? I don't know if it's the same in terms of expectations. Yes. So basically, their doctor, they've been in the hospital, their doctor now says, we can't do anything else.
Right.
So then they get transferred to hospice.
Right.
And that's where you step in.
Yep.
Right.
I think the starting point typically, because there's an abundance of misinformation or a lack of information or disparate pieces of information, the first thing you have to do is find out what they actually know. Mm-hmm. And it's often striking. So you'll see somebody who's literally days from death who doesn't know that they're actually dying that soon. So there's, the over-prognostication is by a factor of 2 to 3 on average. So,
really?
So resetting things often first requires determining what somebody understands, and then really what do they want to know. And what you find is people want to know. Mm-hmm. Again, because they've been having this dialogue with themselves, often that's incongruent to what they're hearing from the medical practitioner. So you kind of reset the table.
And they should expect that it's fine for them to sleep more. Don't bother them. What do you tell a family, like what to expect in terms of the actual process? Just make sure. I feel like once we're in the hospital, we're so trained to be like, make sure you turn them over, make sure they're not getting bed sores, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I think what you do typically is you go with them and repaint the picture. Mm-hmm. So I could do this with you, with somebody you've lost, for example. Before they died, and if we were to talk and say, what were they like 6 months ago? What were they like 4 months ago, 2 months ago today? It's seldom a falling off the cliff phenomena, it's a slow slide. Mm-hmm. That slope or that trajectory is the same one that's going to take them to the end. They've often been in the process of dying, but nobody's informed them. It's functional, it's practical, it's eating, it's sleeping, it's activity level, it's talking less, it's being different. And once you can recontextualize what somebody's experienced, and then they can usually understand what's going to continue in the same trajectory.
Do you bring in social workers and that sort of thing?
Yeah, so hospice was brilliantly framed in that it was a number of things. It was really an antithesis of the medical model. So it's mandated volunteer, mandated spiritual care, social work, nursing, The physicians there, but they're really truly are part of a team.
I find that within treatment, there's a lot of times like a cultural gap. For example, like my family's Japanese, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it took us a while to figure out, have aides and doctors and stuff to understand her cultural background, how she likes to be treated, how she likes to eat, how she likes, you know what I mean? It's like all these different things that are subtle yet important,
Yeah.
Especially when one's sick. So I'm just wondering, at the end of life, is that taken into account, or is there kind of a standard thing that happens?
Yeah, no, it's not templated at all. Again, imagine your mom or your father now is taken care of in their home, and you're present. It can't help but become personalized and specific to that individual. It's very, very much about your choices and your perspectives. Yeah, I mean, you've come out of a sterile, institutionalized form of care, right, and process to really, we're coming to you. We're meeting you where you are, psychologically, spiritually, in terms of your wishes, all those sorts of things.
I feel like the fear of death is probably one of the number one things, right, that it creates anxiety for them. What do you say to patients who are fearful of
Yeah,
that
again,
happening?
it's remarkable for the fact that it's really more anticlimactic than climatic. It's quieter, it's gentler, it's more peaceful. It requires less intervention than you would think. You've essentially been doing it, on your own, and well. It's a lessening, and it's more peaceful than imagined. And you just go describe it. Again, it goes to this issue. In the absence of conversations, in the absence of knowledge, people presume fears. You've already done it. You made an assumption about pain, that it's
Right.
going to be, if I told you were dying, that's probably the first thing is, am I going to suffer? So people need to be reassured what dying looks like. It's actually hard to die in a sufferable state because you need to sleep. And to sleep, you need to be comfortable. And you need to be comfortable not only physically, but psychologically. So gradually that comes over you, and people generally die peacefully. I would do a whole thing on hospice. I would start with looking at the myths. So people live longer with hospice, you don't live shorter. You don't deny care. If you have heart failure, the way you manage symptoms of heart failure at the end of life is by managing the heart failure. So it's not a lesser care model. In fact, it's a richer care model. So, it's not like, oh, you flicked a switch and now you're in hospice. You stop all your medication.
Right, no, that's what I did think.
I mean, you stop the absurdities,
Right.
like cholesterol lowering medicines, that are meant to treat end organ disease over many years, but you manage diabetes. It doesn't feel good to have a high blood sugar. So, all the things that make you feel more comfortable need to be kept in place. So it's actually aggressive medicine.
Yeah.
It's not passive medicine. Yeah.
But does that physically fight with the body that's trying to die?
No, not at all. Mm-mm. No.
Oh,
No.
interesting.
Yeah.
People talk about these last moments, right? That hearing is the last to go, that you see a light.
No.
There's like these kind
No,
of...
the light thing's bullshit. You're confusing near death for end of life experience. So the near death phenomena is universally, I've never seen it because that's folks who clinically die and come back.
Right.
The universal experience apparently is that you see a white light in a tunnel and all that sort of things. That's not what happens.
That's not what happens?
No.
No sparkly clouds?
No. And there's all sorts of things, like they say that's, the occipital lobe of your brain being deoxygenated, and, there's a medical or physical explanation for why that may or may not be occurring. People who are genuinely dying and not coming back from it don't experience the tunnel white light thing. I think maybe the odd time I've heard of a light, but not like you do. That's what NDAs are, near-death experiences are.
Right.
These folks aren't near death, they're dying. Yeah.
Right. But they do say that the hearing
Yeah.
is the last thing to go, and that people
absolutely.
should talk to people really at their last moments if they feel...
Yeah, and it's one of the things is dying people don't want to be treated like dying people. They want to be treated like the people they were in life. So sometimes the most comfortable deaths, like if they're a kitchen family where everyone hangs around and it's vibrant and a lot of open communication, that's how they like their room.
Oh, interesting.
Nobody wants to be treated like they're frail and need to be put on a shelf. There are people who certainly are uncomfortable, that matriarchal person who doesn't want to be seen in her nightgown. Maybe that's different. But generally people want to be treated, it becomes really profoundly a human experience. And they don't want to be sterilized, they don't want to be put on a shelf, they don't want to be treated as though something makes them less. So they want to be touched, they want to be talked to, they want to be regarded, and they hear.
We would love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to leave a comment in the section below. If you found the video helpful, share it with a friend or family. And be sure to subscribe so you'll always be notified as soon as new episodes are uploaded. You can DM me on Instagram or Facebook at This Is Modern Aging. But the best way to keep in the loop about our latest episodes and our upcoming events is to sign up on our email list at thisismodernaging.com. To live your best life tomorrow, you need to start today. So thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time on Modern Aging.